Everybody, welcome to oral session 4. We're going to be starting in just a few minutes.
The thing I was going to say is that oral session, so the
Feeling good?
I'm Bernadette.
Bernadette, I'm Peter. We're still missing the third presenter circle.
Hi. Excuse me, we're waiting for the third presenter for the surgical robot transformer. So if you're here to present that paper, please come up to the stage.
Both of you. That is a big, man, that's like a 0 or 1. Great. I think we should try to do it. So I think we're ready.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to oral session 4. So in this session, we are going to have 3 papers. The first paper today is RoVi-Aug, Robot and Viewpoint Augmentation for Cross-Embodiment Robot Learning. And Lawrence Chen and Chengfeng Zhu from Berkeley are going to present.
Test. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Chen Feng.
And I'm Lawrence.
We are very excited to talk about our work, RoVi-Aug, Robot and Viewpoint Augmentation for Cross-Embodiment Robot Learning. So imagine you just spent several days collecting data, train robot policy, and during evaluation, you accidentally bumped your camera. Well, most of the data you have collected is probably not useful anymore. The policy will no longer work. The ongoing experiments are no longer valid. You have to repeat these efforts all over again. What a sad story. And unfortunately, this relates to many of us because it happens quite often. Just as the variability of camera viewpoints poses a challenge for the generalization and robustness of policies, every year, new embodiments keeps coming out. And it's not practical to expect that we repeat large data collection efforts for every new embodiment. And the sad story is that existing policies do not generalize well to new embodiments in a zero-shot manner. For example, a diffusion policy trained on Franca robot data does not work well for the UR5 robot. Moreover, these two challenges often couple together because cross-embodiment transfer usually involve viewpoint changes. It's not always realistic to set up cameras at the exact same pose with different setups. And in this work, we try to address these two challenges. First, Toward the goal of making policies robust to viewpoint changes, prior work have proposed to use either distillation or contrast learning to learn view invariant representations. However, both of them require the simulation and have to overcome the sim to real gap because it is hard to collect real data with various viewpoints. On the other hand, cross-embodiment policies such as RTX, Octal, and OpenVIA have shown great progress in generalization to new tasks and environments by training on large data. However, in terms of generalization to new embodiments, these models are still limited in zero-shot performance and usually require fine-tuning with target robot data. We are quite inspired by previous work that used generative model for robot data computation. For example, ROSI, GenOrg, and Robot Agent use diffusion model to generate distract objects, backgrounds, and new tasks. In contrast, we propose to use diffusion models to generate new robots and camera viewpoints. And we build upon our previous work, Mirage. The Mirage is a test-time adaptation algorithm by replacing the unseen target robots with the source robots that the policy is trained on. However, Mirage assumes that we know the camera pose, and the Mirage requires high computation cost and latency during inference. Instead of the test-time adaptation, we try to perform the training time data computation. And we introduced the RoVi-Aug, the robots and viewpoint augmentation. Given one robot image, we use generative models to transfer them into new robots one by one. So how do you achieve this? Given one robot image, the first step is to use a segmentation model to segment the robot out, and we use LoRa to fine-tune the SAM. Our fine-tuning dataset is constructed by first rendering different robots in various poses and paste them onto diverse backgrounds from the ImageNet. And then we transfer the robot into a new robot by diffusion model. Specifically, we fine-tune the stable diffusion with ControlNet. To construct our fine-tuned dataset, we generate 800,000 image pairs of different robots at the same pose from various camera viewpoints. Next, we implant the missing region using a video implanting model and paste them into the background. In addition to the robot augmentation, we also perform the viewpoint augmentation. Specifically, we use zero NVS, which can perform low synthesis from a single image. For each robot image, we would random sample a translation vector and a rotation angle and ask zero NVS to generate a novel view.
Putting the pipeline together, we have RoVi-Aug. Given an input image, we segment the robot, transfer it into another robot, and paste it back to the background. We further generate novel views using zero NVS, which can be applied to either the original robot images or the augmented robot images. Here are some examples. The first column are the original robot images, and the second column shows robot augmentation, and third column shows viewpoint augmentation applied on top of the second column images. Here's an example when RoVi-Aug is applied to the entire robot trajectory. This is the input video, and this is applying robot augmentation to each frame of the video. And this is after both robot and viewpoint augmentation, and the policy will be trained on the augmented data. To study the effectiveness of RoVi-Aug, we conduct physical experiments on two different robots, Franca and UR5. We selected 5 tasks, and here are some videos showing the source robot demonstrations. We first study the case where the robots are changed, but the camera pose is kept the same. Without any augmentation, the source robot policy barely succeeds on the target robot. We compare robot augmentation with Mirage, and we see that they achieve comparable performance in the zero-shot case. However, Mirage is much more computationally expensive and requires calibrated camera. Moreover, if we allow policy fine-tuning, robot augmentation achieves much better performance. It is important to note that Mirage does not support policy fine-tuning. If we change both robots and camera viewpoints, then Mirage success rates decrease quickly as the camera becomes more and more different from the training views. Similarly, robot augmentation alone is not sufficient. In contrast, if the policy is trained with both robot and viewpoint augmentation, it is robust even at large viewpoint changes on the target robot. Here are some examples. The demonstration data is collected on the Franca robot as shown in the first row. After training the policy with RoVi-Aug, we can deploy the policy on the UR5 robot at test views that are 25 centimeters and 35 degrees camera viewpoint difference. Here are examples where the demonstration data is collected on the UR5 and the policy is evaluated on the Franca at test views shown in the bottom row. Moreover, RoVi-Aug enables cross-embodiment policies that are robust even when the camera is moving at test time. Here's an example of transferring from the Franca to a UR5. And here's an example of transferring from the UR5 to a Franca when the camera is moving at test time. RoVi-Aug can be applied to OpenX embodiment datasets as well. Here we show an example image from the RoboTurk dataset, and we can transfer the Sawyer robot into a UR5. And here's an example image from Viola, and we can transfer the Franca robot into a JCO robot. Please check out our project website and our poster session in the afternoon. Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Hello? Hello?
Thank you. Oh,
Yes.
sorry. Thank you very much. If there's any questions, we can start now.
Sorry. Thanks for the important talk. I was wondering, what is the action space of this robot? Is it an effector pose position or is it joint space position?
So it's end effector Cartesian control, X, Y, Z, and rotation.
I see. Have you guys tested on transferring joint space actions?
It would not work because we have to align the action spaces in order to do the transfer. So here we only align the coordinate frames and we do the Cartesian control and we focus on bridging the image gap, the visual gap, instead of the control space gap.
Okay, thank you.
All right, one more question. There's one in the front.
Hey, thanks for the great talk. I was wondering for the viewpoint augmentation, the zero NVS model was probably trained on a certain selection of environments and objects and so on. And if you use weirder and weirder environments and objects, it probably breaks down at some point. So I was wondering if you looked into what ways could there be to make this work for unseen environments that the NVS model has not seen yet?
That's a great question. So we actually tested the extreme cases for zero NVS, and we found that 20, 30 degrees is the most we can get out of the box for the performance of zero NVS. When it's varied much more than that, there's a lot of artifacts where it doesn't know the robot is part of, it's an integral object. And I think to make it work better, we need to take some robot data sets and fine-tune zero NVS. For example, we can mix simulation data where we have we can sample very different views and fine-tune the zero NVS.
All right, thank you very much. I'm Bernadette Bucher from University of Michigan. Our next chair will introduce the next paper.
Right, I'm Karol Hausmann. I'll be co-chairing this session. Next up, we have Robot See, Robot Do, part-centric feature fields for visual imitation of articulated objects, presented by Justin Kerr and Chung-Min Kim from UC Berkeley.
Hello, everyone. My name is Justin.
And I'm Chung-Min.
And we're presenting Robot See, Robot Do, a method for articulated object 4D reconstruction for visual imitation. So because we're in Munich, let me spin you a tale of Oktoberfest in 2050. Let's say that we've figured out this whole robot learning thing, and so there's household robots widespread in everyone's home, and so naturally they're helping us with the festivities. And let's also say in this fairy tale world that I'm somehow German and I'm hosting a little party, when suddenly disaster strikes, and the robot doesn't know how to open up our Hofbrau keg because it's never seen it in the training data. So what should I do? Well, I think we can all agree that in the middle of these festivities, I don't want to have to bring out my VR goggles or whatever and teleoperate the robot, and it would be great if instead I could just show it what to do with my own hands. And this is called visual imitation, and we all do it extremely naturally, even from a very young age. But for robots, this turns out to be really hard because of cross-embodiment. The gap between our human hands and our robot grippers is massive. So let's look back to humans for inspiration, because this kid is actually doing something very deep here. You can see that he's actually imitating the same motion using a completely different configuration with 2 hands instead of 1. And if you dig even deeper, during the demonstration, he's not even looking at the human hand at all, but rather the object. And so the first key takeaway we have here is that humans can learn from object motion without adhering to hand motion. And in this paper, we try to do the same. Now, this is not a new idea. There's a lot of related work on object-centric visual imitation, even from this conference, going from 2D tracking from key points or dense flow, or to full 3D motion extraction of hand and object motion. In RSRD, we focus explicitly on articulated imitation through the lens of 4D reconstruction. That way, we can go from a video like this and mimic it on a robot with a very different morphology like this. So how does this work? Well, as inputs to the robot C stage, we take in a 3D object scan of the object, as well as a monocular demonstration video like you see on the right, specifying the desired behavior. From these inputs, we reconstruct a 4D differentiable part model from which we can extract the 3D motion of the object. So digging a little deeper, a 4D differentiable part model consists of a Gaussian splat of the object of interest, which we have also imbued with dyno features, which capture the rich semantics of the object and its parts, like you can see here. So why do we use dyno? Well, because it gives us really strong part correspondence, like has been shown over and over in related work. So you can see that given these query points, you have really nice similarity over the object. The last step is that we leverage our prior work, Garfield, to segment the object and divide it into its constituent subparts. And this is a really nice application of Gaussian splatting because this explicit representation lets you divide it. So now that we have 4D DPM, what do we actually do? How do we extract the motion? So we rely on differentiable rendering to do this. So we represent every part pose with an optimizable parameter from which we can render out an image of dyno features. Next, to optimize the pose, we simply subtract these features from the features we extracted from the video, and we backprop all the way through the rendering process to update all the poses. Now you might be wondering, why do we bother with differentiable rendering instead of just a feed-forward network or something? And that's because it turns out to be really useful for incorporating priors. So in addition to these dyno objectives, we use a foundation model for depth as a prior, as well as a 3D geometric regularization, which consists of local rigidity. And without these methods, the methods kind of diverge. So you can see that without this regularization, the ear of the bear is falling off and the scissors are kind of falling apart, but with it, they're nice and coherent. So this is what the 4D reconstructions look like when you overlay the tracking on top of the demonstration view. And even if you look from another perspective, this is a nice full 4D object motion reconstruction, capturing both the camera pose as well as the motion of all the parts. Quickly touching on some results of the tracking, this is a nice highly jointed object with all the legs and the arms segmented, and you can capture the wagging of the tail very naturally. You can capture thin objects like the sunglasses here. You can even remove parts entirely, like pulling out the ball from this box. And this is a fun example of kind of pushing the limits of what the system can do, capturing this digit robot dancing.
So given these 3D motion reconstructions, how can we actually generate the robot actions? Well, these actions come from our hands, so because we wouldn't get the motion without them, so we really want to use them. But how exactly are we supposed to do that? Well, we don't exactly want to copy the hand because, one, the embodiment gap. Human hands are wonderful, they can do amazing things, but that's precisely the reason why we can't do the same thing, like make the same series of contacts, especially with the parallel jaw grippers. And our hands will create shifting and sliding contacts without us even thinking about it, so it's going to be in our demonstration data. Again, this level of dexterous control might not be always possible. And even aside from the cross-embodiment problem, copying the hand might be literally impossible, depending on the scene and the initial configuration of the object. So instead, we also apply an object-centric flavor to the problem by focusing instead on the part that we care about. For example, from this video, the robot should know to grab the 2 red handles of the scissors. So how do we get these parts? We track the hand's 3D location during the demonstration by using hammer, and we put the hands alongside the target object and determine which parts stay consistently close to the hand. Finally, with the knowledge of which parts to grasp and how they move, we can directly optimize for the robot joints that match the 4D states of objects. Now, time for some real robots. Here, we are opening and closing the scissors, and just an interesting note, these dual arm manipulation with the rigid parts is a delicate task, because if the arms are just slightly desynchronized, the arms will fight each other and the robot might die due to torque limits. So it's really cool that we can do this from copying the robot object trajectory directly. And this also works for prismatic joints. Here, the robot is shaking the hand of a bear, and this really highlights the benefits of 3D because the robot is holding the back of the tag, although we don't see it in the monocular video demonstration. And this is an example of manipulating delicate objects, such as folding a pair of sunglasses. And this is really enabled by the compliant grippers that we have on the robot. And since our system is object-centric, we are able to adapt to multiple object poses given a single demonstration. And depending on the orientation, we are able to choose different grasps based on what is more accessible. We are using dyno-semantic features for tracking and localizing, so we can adapt to slight variations in shape and color and get this hint of in-category generalization for free. So, while there's some limitations of RSRD, copying the motion is sometimes not enough, and we really want some closed-loop control for it in the future since the robot is trying to close the box, but the box doesn't actually do that. It slips down from underneath.
Another limitation is that the demonstration phase can be somewhat sensitive to camera angle because of self-occlusions of the object. And so in this case, you can see that the top row, the laptop closes correctly, and then the bottom row, it kind of catastrophically fails, even though the inputs are similar. And a final limitation is that tracking can struggle with symmetric parts, like the tail of this plushie here. You can see it kind of rotates along its principal axis because dyno features cannot pick up on those fine details. And a final thing that we want to close with is talking about how does RSRD fit in with policy learning, because you're probably thinking, all of this is just kind of copying motion, and we're not actually learning anything here. So I want to propose 3 ideas for how this could relate. The first idea is for post-training fine-tuning. So let's say I've pre-trained a large robot policy, and now I can use this as a method to specify new behavior very quickly and very naturally. A second idea is to scale from internet videos by tracking object motion on YouTube. And a third idea might be to train object-centric policies with conditioning on the object or the inputs. Just a quick plug for our website. You can actually see all of these results in 3D on your mobile browser or on your laptop, and it's a great way to really explore and dive into the results more. Thanks for your attention, and happy to take questions.
Awesome. Do we have any questions? I have a quick question. What happens if in the demonstration provided by human, you don't capture all the degrees of freedom of the object?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the robot will only imitate the degrees of freedom you demonstrate. So I think what you're getting at is there's a really exciting future direction of trying to kind of show the full range of motion that any object can go about, and then learn general policies on these articulations of the object to achieve tasks. But in this paper, we only have the one that you demonstrated.
Cool, thank you. Any other questions?
Right here?
I'll wait for a mic.
So you mentioned that prismatic joint manipulation is only enabled by the soft grippers. What challenges do you foresee from you doing that with stiff grippers?
I think one problem with the bimanual setup is that we have this, the arms have like a really strong joint limit, the joint torque limit, and there's like this inherent in-hand slip that the compliant grippers allow. So if there's any like errors in like the tracking, maybe it's like slightly jerky, a little unstable, or maybe the object slightly slips from underneath, inside, or something like that, the robot won't like the robot won't terminate unexpectedly. I think that's really important. If I'm holding a mic like this, and it can kind of rotate a little bit, I'm not sure if does that answer your question? Yeah, I think the compliance in the TPU material is really nice.
One more question?
So I'm curious if you can put these object assets into a simulation.
Yeah, we are too. I think this is another very exciting future direction of kind of digitizing articulated objects, putting them in a sim, and then doing policy learning in that. We may have a follow-up on that, yeah. But fully agree, super cool.
Awesome, let's thank the speakers again.
Thanks.
And next up, we have Surgical Robot Transformer, SRT, imitation learning for surgical tasks, surgical subtasks, presented by Brian Kim from Johns Hopkins University.
Hi everyone, my name is Brian. It's really excited to be here. Thanks for listening in. So the title for today's talk is Surgical Robot Transformer, imitation learning for surgical tasks. This joint work with Johns Hopkins and Stanford. And the main goal of this work is to start thinking about how we can automate fundamental and dexterous manipulation tasks for robotic surgery. And before diving into the meat of the work, I wanted to start from like a larger perspective of where all this work is going and how this work fits into a larger vision. And in general, I think that surgical robots have immense scaling potential. So to give some statistics, Intuitive Surgical is the company that makes Da Vinci robots has reported that they were able to perform 10 million surgeries using 6,500 systems, and they have 55,000 trained surgeons across 70 countries. And often the video and kinematics data are recorded, which means that it's a nice setting for exploring imitation learning algorithms and doing research on foundation models and so on. And this paper really tries to take a key step in this direction. And so one of the early things that we've tried is trying to get a very basic imitation learning algorithm work on the Da Vinci. And so we have a fairly vanilla setup where we have action chunking with transformers, and we have the policy action defined as absolute position and rotation with respect to the endoscope tip, which you see in the image. And using this very simple recipe, when we actually run our policy, we find that it's completely failing, as you can see in the video. And one thing we discovered afterwards is that the Da Vinci robot is very notorious for having very inaccurate forward kinematics. And the error is about plus or minus 5 centimeter error, which is really not what you see in typical robots. And there are two main reasons why this is the case. One is hysteresis. A lot of the risk mechanism you see is driven by cables, and these cables are subject to stretching and getting loose over time. And especially another reason is that the earlier models used potentiometers for joint measurements, and potentiometers are not very reliable sensors for measuring joints of the robot. Usually you want to use motor encoders. And so what happens is that when you command the robot to reach a point in the workspace, it will actually never get there because of these forward kinematic errors. And that's why you're seeing that failure in the video. And so what does that mean? Does that mean all this data that we've collected on the Da Vincis are completely useless? So we try to think of potential solutions. And you might think, well, why don't you just do hand-eye calibration? But this is actually not a practical solution because we already assume that all this data is collected, and we cannot really go back in time and do hand-eye calibration again. And so what we opt for is trying to explore an action representation so that you can directly use this approximate inaccurate kinematics data to get a policy that actually works. And that's going to be the meat of the paper. And so this leads to one of the main contributions of our work. And the main idea is to use relative actions. And our claim is that even with forward kinematics errors, if you use relative actions, you can get a policy that actually works. So let me try to illustrate this roughly using a very simple toy example. So imagine that your goal is to pick up this needle, and your policy generates delta motions. But due to inaccurate forward kinematics, it actually ends up taking the wrong path. Well, you might think this is not great, but in the grand scheme of things, you're actually getting slightly closer to your goal. And in the next iteration, your policy generates another delta actions, and again, due to forward kinematics errors, say you go into a different path. And you can see that despite the error in the motion, you're actually getting quite close to the object that you want to grasp. And you can imagine if you iterate this more and more, you're actually getting probably going to end up very close to the object that you want to grasp. And this is the kind of the main intuition behind why relative motion can lead to a policy that is decent even in the presence of forward kinematics errors. So this leads to our first design iteration of action representation, where now we're defining the actions as delta position and delta rotation with respect to the current end effector frame. This is a moving body frame. And already we are able to see improvements in performance. Now it's actually able to grasp the needle, but unfortunately it's not able to complete the latter task of handing over the needle to the opposing gripper because it's needle pickup and handover. And upon close inspection, we observed that the orientation of the grippers looked correct, but it's really the translation errors that was contributing to this issue. And so we tried to kind of think about why this might be the case. And roughly what the policy is trying to do is a really hard problem. And intuitively what's trying to do is it's trying to localize the current end effector frame based on images and trying to generate delta position and translation along the implicitly localized axis. And this is just a lot of things you need to get right. And so we just tried to relax this a little bit and say, hey, why don't we just make the delta positions with defined with respect to the camera or the endoscope tip frame, so that you don't have to sort of worry about constantly trying to track the orientation of your grippers. And so this leads to a hybrid relative action representation where the delta position and delta rotations are defined with respect to two different frames. One is with respect to the camera endoscope tip, which is approximately the camera frame, and the other is the current end effector frame for the rotations. And so this leads to pretty nice result for policy learning. So we explore 3 tasks: knot tying, needle pickup and handover, and lifting tissue. For context, knot tying is relevant after suturing. You want to kind of tie up that wound. Needle pickup, handover, right before you're initiating suture, you want to make sure the needle is grasped correctly. And lifting tissue is relevant when you're trying to lift a piece of organ, or when you're doing dissection. You want to stretch the tissue so that it's easier to cut and dissect. And we can see that with about several hundreds of demonstrations, you get a policy that gets about 90% or over. And it almost seems like the forward kinematics error never existed. And just to kind of give a comparison, this is the result that you get if you use absolute forward kinematics of the robot to train a policy. It completely fails, again, due to the hardware constraints I mentioned earlier. And we also try to get some nice videos off of this. So here we can see that these imitation learning algorithms have built-in capabilities to kind of correct for mistakes. Here, this is pretty cool. It can do knot tying on pork tissue. We've never trained it on pork tissue. We only trained it on this sort of yellow suture pad that you saw. It can do needle pickup. It can kind of detect that miss and kind of continue picking that up. And it can do needle pickup on various scenarios. And I think this is really exciting. But before I finish, I wanted to kind of give like a little preview of what we've been working on, because this is really nice. You see that you can do imitation learning on this sort of confined setting on tabletop task, but would imitation learning be relevant for actual surgical, clinically relevant settings? And so we've been exploring deploying imitation learning algorithms on real pig animal tissues. And so this is a real surgical procedure known as cholecystectomy. It involves adding 3 clips, these plastic clamps that you're seeing here, on each of the tubes, and you actually have to cut them. And it's a fairly long horizon procedure. It takes about 3 to 5 minutes. And we added some nice features like you can see in the top left of the video, it's kind of self-generating language task instruction so that it can kind of guide itself through the long horizon task. And I think this is really promising because it shows that imitation learning is not something that just works in a toy environment, but as something that can truly be translated into clinical settings maybe in the near or the far future. And so in summary, I think imitation learning is really promising for exploring automation in surgery. If you have bad forward kinematics, maybe you should want to try using relative motion. It worked well for the Da Vinci robot. Maybe it works for other robots as well. I didn't really talk about this, but wrist cameras also help a lot with surgical tasks. And you can read about the performance gains we get in the paper. And I think overall, we're really excited to scale this further with more data in the future with collaboration with institutions and companies. And I'll be happy to take questions.
There's a question over there.
Hello, thanks for the interesting talk. I was wondering, how do we ensure the safety of imitation learning algorithm in a surgical setup?
So we didn't really I don't have a good solution to that. I think that's a big research problem that I don't have a good solution to just yet.
Hi, thanks for the talk, really interesting. I'm curious, so the policies you're playing are like 12x speed up. Do you have a spec or a target how fast you would ideally want to be doing these tasks in a surgical context?
Yeah, so actually what happened was the slow speed was due to a controller issue. We're using a very, very slow controller, and we switched to a new controller, and it's almost real-time human demonstration speed. So that issue has been solved after we recorded the videos.
Hello, thanks for the great talk and very cool application. I'm wondering if you have thought about adding new sensory modalities to the system, such as tactile sensing, which could provide more accurate pressure information.
Yeah, I think the DaVinci 5 came out with tactile sensors, so I think it'll be another couple of years we'll get those DaVinci 5s in the research lab, so I think tactile sensing will be useful. But it's interesting that a lot of surgeons don't, because DaVinci robots don't have tactile sensors, so they just purely rely on vision to do a lot of safety critical tasks, so so far it's worked out okay.
You're using the DVRK for this, is that correct?
Yes, that's the DVRK.
Okay, and then have you tried any calibration techniques to reduce the errors in the end effector pose?
Definitely we explored calibration, but not calibration on pre-collected data. I think that's a little different story. If you do calibration from beginning to the end, then you're good. But we kind of assume that we have already this big data that is uncalibrated, essentially. But we haven't really thought too much into that.
Okay, because there are a number of techniques for improving the precision of those arms.
Yeah. I think there are a few.
You might want to acknowledge those in your future talks.
Oh yeah, sure.
All right, let's thank the speaker again.
All right, that concludes oral session 4, and the posters from the talks that you just saw will be in poster session 3, and it's now lunch.